make it clear.
Order. I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Sure, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with the best political team on television from a very, very, very Auckland perspective. Warning, we're as fair and balanced as Fox News. Joining me tonight are my revolving panel of bloggers and Auckland opinion shapers. Here's the editor of independent news site livenews.co.nz, commentator and journalist Selwyn Manning, and he is an author, a columnist and political commentator, proof that the revolution will indeed be televised, blogger Chris Trotter. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, are we in Afghanistan to ingratiate ourselves with America, or are we there to provide stability for a nation in transition, and will more deaths force an early exit? Issue 2, Paula Bennett says she would breach beneficiary privacy again while the unions are put through a witch hunt to source the MFAT leaks. Does the government have a double standard when it comes to privacy? And issue 3, does news of solid energy being rain-checked strengthen or weaken the government's case for asset sales? Plus, we'll end the show on the final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. The loss of 5 New Zealand soldiers in 2 weeks has ratcheted up the political pressure on why we're still involved in Afghanistan. Selwyn, is it uncomfortable to decide we want to pull out after 10 deaths when the people of Afghanistan have had to suffer over 40,000 casualties, 250,000 externally displaced people and 5,000 internally displaced people from this occupation?
Let's be very clear. The government's rationale for our troops being up there at the moment is framed by reconstruction, digging wells, building infrastructure and helping out. It is not arguing that New Zealanders are up there fighting to save Afghanistan from the Taliban scourge. We have obviously had that role, and it was a fact that was denied New Zealanders for many long years. But the fact is that this part of this conflict is no longer New Zealand's war.
Right.
It is something that we have attempted to actually put in place some remedy to benefit people. But the whole thing falls down now. Now, I suppose that my proposition here, Bomber, is that John Key is now facing a moral question that he's trying to avoid. His lines in the New Zealand Herald and other newspapers about we could bring them back in April, but then again the Japanese are building an airstrip that may delay that is absolute pure logistical nonsense. The fact is, John Key has 2 things to decide here. 1, to bring the troops back early and save Kiwi lives, or to send more, deploy more, and risk that the likelihood is that a number of them will be coming back in coffins.
Has the damage to Afghanistan been worth the intervention, in your thoughts?
You know, there was an argument when we first went there, I think that was peddled out by the Labour Party, Labour government at the time, where New Zealand was contributing to a UN-led effort that was going to assist to remove the Taliban's hold on a country that had been suffering for years under its rule, women, children, etc. We bought into that on the point of view of multilateralism and also humanitarianism. What we have been finding from people like John Stevenson, who's been reporting up there for a long time now, is that we were swindled into something else taking place.
Chris, critics will strongly argue that Afghanistan is a means for America to empire build at a cost to Russia and China, and that 9/11 allowed the US to launch vast, uncriticised foreign adventures. As an independent country, should New Zealand allow ourselves to remain in that web of interests?
Well, New Zealand seized rather cynically, in my view, upon the events of 9/11 to reconstruct its relationship with the United States. New Zealand had felt the absence of America in terms of military procurement, training, and that general sense of security that comes from being one of the 5 fingers of the Anglo-Saxon fist, albeit the smallest.
Little pinky.
So we participated, and we participated in a way that had proved incredibly successful from a public relations point of view in Timor-Leste. when you have old socialists like Michelle Court going there with Jeremy Elwood, entertaining the troops, coming back, singing the praises of the New Zealand Defence Force, you're on to a winner. So the provincial reconstruction team model was very similar to the Timor-Leste model, very similar to our intervention in the Solomons. So that was fine. But, you know, you need a very long spoon if you intend to take a meal with the devil. And our spoon was not long enough in Afghanistan, because over the years we have been drawn in to what is ostensibly ISAF, but essentially a US-UK initiative. John Stevenson has exposed some of the moral hazard involved in that relationship. Nikki Hager's brilliant book, Other People's Wars, has done the same. And now if you actually analyse what is happening in Afghanistan, you know, the digging of wells and the building of schools has largely gone by the board. Now, our soldiers, ill-equipped, we are not in a position to play the role that we have been playing now for some time. We have forward bases. We are sending troops ready for combat. This isn't wandering around the villages, smiling at the children, helping to sink a well or build a health clinic. This is fighting the Taliban. And frankly, you know, both Labour and National have completely stripped the New Zealand Defence Force of the kind of resources it needs to fight this sort of battle. The Taliban aren't the people they were. There's Taliban 1.0, which is the classic Mujahideen with his turban and his Kalashnikov. John Stevenson talks about Taliban 2.0. They're just as likely to be wearing a Western suit and carrying a laptop. They're very good at building IEDs. They've got a different plan now. Their plan is to drive the Westerners, the Christians, out of Afghanistan, to sap their will, to break their morale, to pick on small countries like New Zealand, to force them to leave,
the wedge strategy,
and to use that to undermine the whole ISAF initiative.
Any doubts in your mind that they can't achieve that? Any doubts that they can't win, the Taliban? Oh
no, the Taliban have already won in a sense. If you talk to John, as I have over the last couple of days, he said, look, if I was to drive 25 kilometres, 25 minutes in any direction out of Kabul, without the sort of massive protection that is required, I'd be dead. I'd be dead.
And that's different to a year ago, isn't it?
Yes.
So how many more deaths would New Zealand forces have to lose before Key felt the ground move from under him on this issue? I mean, five in 2 weeks is a hell of a shock. What are the numbers?
Look, Bomber, I would say that the people who have already died are numbers enough. You know, I spoke to John Stevenson on the phone the other night. After this, I saw a News Talk ZB report, and it was quoting John, and so I just wanted to confirm that it was accurate to what his sentiment was. And he said that these politicians, John Key and Jonathan Coleman, and I'll just quote here, they do not understand, they do not know what it's like when a vehicle is hit by a massive bomb. They don't know what it's like to see people shot, and these people are making decisions that affect their lives and are putting other people in harm's way. He focused on the moral questions around that. John Key's response, in contrast, was about the airport and whether or not it was going to be worked on by the Japanese.
Although I think it's fair to say, if I'm sorry to interrupt, Selwyn, but in a way, he has done New Zealand a favour, though, John Key, by announcing the bringing forward of our withdrawal from September to April, and it may even be earlier than that. I mean, the next rotation, I understand, is in October, which would seem to me to be
I guess my argument on that, though, is that John Key is looking to save political face, because it's a logistical early withdrawal, as opposed to
in terms of saving our soldiers' lives. He may have given the Taliban the victory that they've been seeking, because in the New York Times and elsewhere, overseas media are saying New Zealand has responded to these deaths by bringing forward its withdrawal, which was exactly what the Taliban
Final question to both of you on this. Look, John Stevenson and Nikki are two journalists, I think we'd all agree, who have done more than most to highlight what we're actually doing in Afghanistan. And both were threatened and they were maligned for it. Has, in both
By
of your
the Prime
opinions,
Minister.
by the Prime Minister no less, has the mainstream media done a good enough job of informing New Zealanders of our involvement in this war? It's over a decade now.
Certainly not. And you've blogged about this, so I won't repeat your words back to you. But I would say, just two things. Hearing Jonathan Coleman, for the first time that I can recall, with a note of seriousness in his voice, talking about discussions with the New Zealand Defence Force, basically saying, is this really a good idea, this forward patrolling? Aren't we risking more deaths? He was pretty much channeling John Stevenson. And just one chilling note to end this discussion on, from my perspective anyway, is John's description of Taliban 2.0 as ghosts that walk in the dark.
Well,
which is
there
pretty
you go.
scary.
Has the mainstream media done enough? I mean, we seem to have just bought hook, line and sinker whatever the army say they need.
One of the most disturbing things I ever saw from the New Zealand Press Gallery journalists was when John Stevenson was ridiculed by the Prime Minister in the wake of his Eyes Wide Shut article, and the group largely without hesitation laughed along with the Prime Minister during that ridicule. It was a sad day for journalism. I think too that relating to the situation there, the New Zealand Herald piece this morning, and it was identifying how 10 other people, that's talking about US deaths here, and it was an AP report, and it's saying 10 other people were gunned down by attacks by members of the Afghan security forces, either disgruntled turncoats or Taliban infiltrators. I just added that because of what Chris was saying, and I support what Chris was saying. The Taliban, and John Stevenson has alluded to, it's Taliban 2.0. They also have advanced intelligence networks in operation, and that's not something that you saw 5 years ago.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 2, Paula Bennett has had a terrible week. The Human Rights Commission ruled that she did breach a beneficiary's privacy. She was then publicly spanked by John Key for suggesting she would breach privacy again, and topped it off by admitting that she wouldn't bother measuring child poverty because children moved in and out of poverty every day. Selwyn, when compared to the witch hunt going on in ACC and MFAT for leaks, is Paula's position on privacy a gross double standard for a high-ranking cabinet minister?
You know, it is. It's a double standard. And what's worse is here is a cabinet minister that is advancing a particular Jenny Shipley style of arrogance toward and indifference toward the privacy standards and values that we have in this country, and using it as a stick. We know that's the situation. I suspect that many of our viewers tonight know that that's the situation. The other thing is that this government, it does not seem to actually allow a debate to allow the public and its public service workers to realise that we have whistleblower laws in this country. That there is a situation where, I know this is a slightly different issue, but I'm just kind of saying that you've got people like Paula Bennett who are breaching issues of privacy, trying to create, I think, a culture of fear relating to communicating the realities of the impact of policies from a point of view of those who want to express it from a public interest point of view. And I just make a reminder, and I just wanted to add into our debate there, Bomber, relating to we have whistleblower protection laws here, disclosure protection legislation.
That's a good point.
That seems to have been forgotten by all and sundry.
Chris, is Paula safe within National? She was caught out making policy up over the drug testing of beneficiaries, where the cost was double the savings she claimed. Is she becoming too polarising a figure to implement welfare reforms, or is that just the way they like their welfare ministers?
I think that's just the way they like it. I mean, this is Waitakere, a woman on steroids. And this is exactly the sort of figure that National needs to hold in those people that 20 years ago would have voted Labour without even a second thought. Well, they've had second, third and fourth thoughts over the years, and Paula Bennett is the result. But Paula Bennett, may seem mad, but as Shakespeare would say, there is method to her madness. I suspect that somewhere in that dark castle called public relations, some warlock has come up with precisely this technique. If you get ordinary citizens, in inverted commas, poking their heads above the parapet, what you do is you use all the resources of the state to identify them, to identify their living circumstances, their financial circumstances, you check their criminal records, you find everything that you can about them, and then you publicly whip them.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as Voltaire said, the English have to execute an admiral every now and then pour encourager les autres. In other words, to encourage the others. Well, in this case, it's discourage the others.
Yeah.
And we saw that junior warlock, Cam Slater, practice exactly the same technique
that's right.
on the warfare.
Yeah. Selwyn, ACC has been damned from every possible angle over their breach of privacy. Has lying about Bronwyn Puller threatening ACC and the defamation acts between Mallard, Little and Collins combined with the fact it was the biggest breach of privacy in New Zealand's history, has that all reached the point of public relations nightmare for ACC? I mean, what now for them?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I mean, the whole issue is such a mess that it almost would take a generation to unravel the whole mess. The common words that were coming out of that, I think, is one way of defining what this government is fast turning into. It is one where, on one hand, it wants to hold on to the ideals of privacy in a sense. It's almost like some would say Stalinist Russia. We own this information. It is ours. It is not the citizens to actually possess. And on the other hand, it will breach the privacy of its citizens to actually achieve its political goals. I loved what you were doing there in illustrating it and how it comes about. And as you were saying it, it reminded me of the Fawlty Towers episode where you had Basil Fawlty with poor little Manuel, where he wasn't performing how they wanted, he poked him in the eye with his bony finger. It's almost like Paula Bennett's been watching it and taking it seriously.
Yeah. Chris, in light of Paula's defence, the public should know the full context of the debate. Should unions be forced to reveal leaks at MFAT when there is genuine concern that policy is detrimental?
Oh, well, there is an awful lot of pride that has been hurt at MFAT, mostly Murray McCully.
Yes.
And you hurt Murray McCully at your own risk. And he means to find out who did him all that damage and to visit the vast quantities of pain upon that person's person. And the PSA and the other associations involved with the diplomats and junior diplomats are going to have to be brave over this. They're just going to have to shut their mouths. Because A, it would simply be cruel and inhuman to pass them over to Murray McCully.
That's right.
And B, it would just set a precedent for all the other little Murray McCullys that are coming on.
And would breach war crime tribunal, surely at some point, handing someone over to Murray McCully.
And breach of the Geneva Conventions.
And this MFAT witch hunt is exactly what I was alluding to with the whistleblower laws that we have here. There was a public interest element to what was being leaked. In some ways, those leakers had every right to do it, and in some ways it was in the nation's interest for them to do so. It is politically abhorrent for McCully to organise a witch hunt to actually try and put them against the wall. And if he does identify them, start citing the Act.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3. Does news of Solid Energy being rain-checked strengthen or weaken the government's case for asset sales? Chris, we've got Solid Energy not ready for sale, Māori water rights holding up Mighty River, and Rio Tinto negotiations threatening any Meridian sale. Surely, John Key's asset sale plans for the 4th quarter of this year are over, aren't they?
Well, that's certainly what the market believes. They're putting it well back now into 2013. But of all those, I think the most serious is Rio Tinto. If Rio Tinto cannot negotiate a new deal with its Meridian, I think, then it is likely to shut down the smelter. It's been shutting smelters down anyway. The global financial crisis has taken a toll on the aluminium industry. However, if it negotiates a deal sufficient to keep them in the country, it's likely to really damage Meridian.
Right.
So Meridian won't be such a hot prospect for those wanting to invest their dollars. If, on the other hand, Rio Tinto just pulls out regardless, then there will be such a glut of electricity in New Zealand. I mean, that smelter takes 15% of all electricity generated in New Zealand. That will suddenly flood onto the market, or it won't flood onto the market because Transpower won't be able to take it out of Manapuri,
Right.
in which case it'll just be lost and Meridian will go belly up.
Yep.
So the whole of the electricity sector, it would seem to me, is now in a state of considerable uncertainty, and markets hate nothing
Yes.
That's exactly
so much
what
as uncertainty.
Selwyn, seeing as the government have already banked the sales of the assets into our budget, how desperate a position is Key putting himself in? And won't that desperation hurt the sale price? If you know you've got to sell...
Exactly. Yeah, this is the whole thing, you know, the supply and demand equations. Let's put ourselves into the shoes of the private Kiwi investor. They're wanting to put their hard-earned dollars into something like that, if you believe the National Party story. If you see question marks around all of these assets, big question marks relating to Solid Energy's commodity price, you know, the coal commodity price collapse that we were talking about months ago, and it seems odd that the National Party cabinet didn't seem to be talking the same kind of debate. All of these question marks, what are the Meridian Energy, like Chris is talking about, with the Rio Tinto contract, Solid Energy, like we meant, Air New Zealand shares at the low. This is all in the Conservative New Zealand Herald this morning. It's all there for the investor, and they'll be thinking, that price I thought that I was prepared to pay for those shares, I'm not going to go and do that. I might put that much in. And so the whole equation undermines the government's fiscal agenda. I think John Armstrong, while it was coming, this column this morning was coming from a Conservative National Party bias point of view, I felt, was framed certainly from that point of view, which is fair enough. But the most interesting stuff was relating to the consequential impact on the government's agenda for the rest of this term. And he was putting words in there like health and education spend. And at the end of the day, Bill English has got the biggest nightmare as a centrist politician to deliver his own to his own constituencies, while this has been undermined by the right-wing ideologues.
To both of you, if Key can't start the sales agenda until the second quarter of next year, could the referendum have more political impact and traction?
Well, I do think it gives an impetus to those collecting signatures. If it's going to be put back, then the timing question becomes difficult from a political perspective for the government, because it claims a mandate. If, however, there is a referendum that is forced upon the government and it delivers a resounding no, then the mandate comes under real pressure. Mind you, if he was a smart politician, which he undoubtedly is, he might take the referendum as a good reason for just throwing all the cards up in the air and saying, forget about it.
Let's get Bill English to answer this particular thing about its timetable. And he says, and he's quoted, once again, New Zealand Herald, Bill English says, where you don't want to prejudge a timetable to try and give any more certainty than there is.
But there is no certainty.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the other,
and he knows as a calculator.
There's a whole lot of pressures on him, not least that if Meridian goes belly up, it's his neck of the woods. But seriously, a finance minister counting on 5 to 7 billion, suddenly to find it not there when he's trying to put together next year's budget, that is a nightmare.
While he's isolated as a centrist, he's isolated with all the right-wingers breathing down his neck, ready to...
Surely this is the danger, isn't it? You're going to have a lot of right-wing ideologues who will be screaming, well, we have to implement these vast wholesale
welfare,
changes.
health and education will pay the price, and that will make the government even more unpopular.
And the question then comes to Bill English, you're with us or get out of the way.
Final question on this. Can Key have killed asset sales off as an issue by 2014? That was the hope.
No. This is an election year issue in the making.
Well, yes, and if we had an opposition, other than the Greens,
Lord,
they would be cheering.
That's right. Let's wrap the show. Final word. Selwyn, your final word this week.
John Key needs to come into a position of honesty with the New Zealand public relating to Afghanistan and our troops, and address his dilemma from a moral position. Does he bring people home and save Kiwi lives, or does he redeploy and risk more lives being lost?
Well said. Thank you. Chris, your final word this week?
Well, as someone who got roughed up by the coppers in 1981, fighting for political equality in South Africa, I found last week a very, very depressing experience, because the Lonmin mine massacre, 34 people shot dead, striking miners. They were not shot dead as they were at Sharpeville by Afrikaners, white men with pistols and Sten guns. They were shot dead by black policemen. And it just brings home so dramatically for me that it was never really about race at all.
Yeah.
It was always in South Africa about the economics of implanting capitalism in that particular part of the world, a capitalism that required vast numbers of workers who happened to be black. That was a factor that was exploited by the Afrikaners, but with the Afrikaners gone, the basic equation remains. That Lonmin mine is owned in London.
Yeah.
Those workers have shared hardly at all in the huge commodities boom of the last few years. They are demanding that the ANC live up to its promises. And the most ironic thing of all was that all those old leftists in Wellington were celebrating the centenary of the ANC while the ANC was presiding over the deaths of striking workers. And it took a few lonely former Maoists to wander around with placards forlornly outside the meeting hall, just reminding them of how few of the promises that we were all struggling for have been kept.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Selwyn. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word. I don't mind that John Banks believes in a literal version of the Bible, that the earth is barely 7,000 years old and that God created the entire cosmos in only 6 days. That's nice. If a grown man wants to believe in and take his ethical cues from an invisible friend with magical powers, let Banks knock himself out. It ain't any of my business to tell another citizen what to take faith in. But when that person is the Associate Minister of Education, rolling out a new far-right education model that empowers other religious fringes to take taxpayer money to teach their children make-believe nonsense, then I have a concern. And American senators claim this week that women have natural powers to prevent pregnancy from rape.
Legitimate rape.
Legitimate rape. As part of the same vein of quasi-factoid religious quackery that fosters intelligent design truthiness and climate denial science, education should enlighten the debate, not darken it. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.